When symbols learned to speak for humans, for most of human history, knowledge died with the people who carried it, disappearing quietly the moment a voice fell silent or a memory failed. To understand why symbols changed everything, we need to return to a world where nothing lasted beyond the present moment. Early humans could speak, gesture, and remember, but once a story ended, it survived only as long as someone repeated it. Knowledge moved slowly, distorted with every retelling, and vanished entirely when generations broke. Every death carried away not just a life, but an irreplaceable library of experience that could never be recovered. As groups grew larger and lives became more complex, memory alone was no longer enough. Trade expanded. Agreements mattered. Warnings needed to outlive the speaker. Humans needed a way to make thoughts permanent. At first, symbols were simple. Marks scratched into stone, lines pressed into clay, shapes painted onto cave walls. They were not language yet, but reminders. This place is important. This animal is dangerous. This belongs to us. Over time, these marks gained meaning beyond their shape. A line could represent a count. A symbol could stand for an object. A sequence could capture an idea. For the first time, humans found a way to store thought outside the mind. This was not about art alone. It was about survival. Symbols allowed knowledge to travel without a voice. A warning could reach someone never met. An agreement could survive long after the speakers were gone. But something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Symbols began shaping how humans thought. Once ideas could be seen, they could be examined, corrected, and expanded. Thought slowed down, becoming deliberate instead of fleeting. And in that moment, communication crossed a boundary. Because when symbols learned to speak, human knowledge stopped belonging to individuals. It began belonging to time itself. Once symbols began carrying meaning, their power expanded faster than anyone could have predicted. Because written marks did something spoken words never could. They refused to disappear. A symbol did not forget. It did not change its story to fit emotion or memory. It waited. Days later, seasons later, even generations later, it still carried the same message, unchanged and indifferent to time. At first, symbols were used for necessity, counting livestock, tracking harvests, marking ownership, recording debts. These were practical needs in growing communities where trust alone was no longer enough. But as symbols multiplied, they began forming systems. A mark no longer stood alone. It depended on the marks around it. Meaning emerged not just from shapes, but from order. Writing was being born. The transition from isolated marks to connected systems represented a leap in abstraction that would define human cognition for every generation that followed. This changed how power worked. Those who could read symbols could control resources. They could enforce agreements. They could preserve laws beyond a single ruler's lifetime. Knowledge stopped being equal, and access to symbols became influence. Symbols also allowed ideas to travel without their creators. A thought born in one place could shape decisions far away. Instructions crossed distances. Belief spread beyond borders. Culture itself became portable. But this shift introduced tension. Symbols could be misunderstood, misused, manipulated. A mark could lie as easily as it could reveal truth. Written authority could overpower spoken experience. The permanence that made symbols powerful also made them dangerous, because a false record could outlast every living witness who knew the truth. Still, humans kept expanding symbolic systems. Sound were tied to marks. Grammar emerged. Complexity increased. Writing stopped being just a tool of record and became a tool of thought. People began thinking in symbols even when no surface was present. Planning improved. Abstraction deepened. The mind learned to hold ideas longer, rearrange them, and imagine possibilities never directly seen. Yet something was lost in the process. Oral stories shifted into fixed forms. Flexibility gave way to permanence. Once written, an idea resisted change. Symbols had given humans memory beyond biology, but they had also introduced a new kind of rigidity. And that tension was only beginning. As writing spread, its influence moved far beyond record-keeping and into the structure of society itself. Because once information could be fixed, it could be organized, enforced, and defended. Laws no longer depended on memory or reputation. They were carved into stone and pressed into clay, standing unchanged regardless of who spoke them. Authority became less personal and more abstract, tied to symbols rather than individuals. This abstraction allowed governance to scale in ways that personal leadership never could, extending control across regions and generations without requiring the constant presence of a ruler. This transformed power. Leaders could govern larger populations without being present. Rules could reach across distance and time. Obedience shifted from trust in people to trust in text. But this system also created distance. Written laws lacked context. They did not hear tone, emotion, or circumstance. A symbol could not forgive. It could only apply. Writing reshaped religion as well. Beliefs once carried through ritual and oral tradition were now preserved in fixed form. Sacred texts replaced fluid interpretation with permanence. Faith became portable but also rigid. Education followed the same pattern. Knowledge stopped being shared only through apprenticeship and experience. It could be copied, studied, and passed down without direct contact. Learning accelerated, but it also became separated from lived reality. And as symbols accumulated, so did complexity. Archives grew, libraries formed. Human knowledge expanded faster than any individual could absorb. Memories shifted from minds to systems. The sheer volume of recorded thought meant that no single person could hold the full picture, creating a dependence on institutions to organize, preserve, and interpret what had been written. This created a new tension inside human identity. Those who mastered symbols gained status and power. Those who could not were left dependent. Literacy became a dividing line. Yet writing also unlocked imagination. Stories traveled farther. Ideas collided. Philosophies evolved. Humans began questioning reality itself through recorded thought. The conflict was no longer between humans and nature. It was between humans and their own creations. Symbols had given humanity a voice that could outlive flesh, but they had also created structures that could outlast compassion. And the world was about to feel the consequences. The climax of writing was not the moment symbols appeared, but the moment humans began living by them. Because once ideas could be preserved, they could also be enforced. Decisions made by the past started shaping lives and present. Laws, beliefs, borders, and identities hardened into written form, resisting change even as the world evolved around them. Writing allowed civilizations to grow vast and complex, but also locked them into systems that were difficult to question. A written rule felt permanent. A recorded belief felt unquestionable. Symbols carried authority simply because they endured, yet the same force that restricted also connected. Writing allowed strangers to cooperate across time and distance. It let knowledge accumulate instead of reset. Each generation no longer started from zero. This is why symbols truly learned to speak. They spoke across centuries. They whispered warnings, preserved mistakes, and carried wisdom forward long after their creators were gone. But they also carried bias, fear, power, intentions frozen in ink. Writing did not just store truth. It stored human flaws with perfect accuracy. Today, we live inside this discovery. Every law we follow, every idea we inherit, every story we believe has passed through symbols before reaching us. Our world is built not only from stone and steel, but from words written long ago. Writing gave humanity memory beyond biology, and with it, responsibility beyond a single lifetime. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. When